I'm Jeff Gordon from Writers Boot Camp, founded in 1989. The living room will come up as a topic today because Gary Goldstein was one of the early alumni, and we're looking forward to seeing him today. Creative Currency number 4. This is the 4th meeting. It's great to see peers in the industry and good friends. The goal of Creative Currency is to establish a comprehension for our alumni and our larger creative community. What's going on in the business? How is it morphing? How are traditional studio people and artists and writers and filmmakers pivoting? What's the next generation of tech and tools as it pertains to the organic nature of storytelling? And so we're excited to get this going. These are 30-minute events versus my hundreds of long-form, more creative, process-driven, and also a lot of conversations with alumni who have been very successful since going through Writers Boot Camp. Those tend to be 75 minutes to 90 minutes, including some Q&A from audience. These aren't live, although we're welcoming people. 2 quick announcements. Please subscribe at Writers Boot Camp's YouTube channel. Also, you can ping me at Instagram at writers_boot_camp, and also on LinkedIn under my name. And that would be great. In addition, we have 2 basic trainings, the 10-week process coming up. July 1st, I have a couple of spots, and August 1st. Those happen to be morning sessions, 10 a.m. LA time. Everything's on Zoom. You take an idea through 3 drafts in 10 hours a week with 6 Zoom meetings overall of a pilot or a feature film script. Or you can do a foundation of a book, and our alumni have 1,000 success stories. Gary's got a few of them, but also hundreds of books published. Because once you learn the process of the compacted storytelling and structure, that compacted expression in movies and TV, your books become crisper, your prose becomes improved. Concision forces decision is one of my sayings. And the material becomes more adaptable to the big and small screen. So we believe in supporting all formats and making distinctions about the process and dispelling fallacies. So feel free to email me any questions after the event, jg@writersbootcamp.com. And now we're just waiting for Gary, an old friend and one of the most productive alumni. It's always exciting to see what he has coming next, including I think his 4th book in fall and a recent play that was award-winning. So we're looking forward to seeing Gary. Also, if you happen to be a past pro member, we'll give the gift of basic training with a year of officer, which is when you continue in project group or return at a discount compared to your initial membership fee. And pro members will always have access to this archive. And we'll have these up on YouTube for some time. And we're creating an archive for our longer form prior interviews from history. It's cool. I recently found 2 microcassettes from the first meeting of Writers Boot Camp in 1989, March. Very classic. So here's Gary. Hopefully he's not having a problem here. There we go. Hi, Gary.
Hey, you ready for me?
Yeah, Gary Goldstein, everybody.
Hello, everybody.
It's just so good to see you. We used to get together at least once a year and
I
have
know,
dinner.
I know. Then the years just fly by. I know.
I know. You know why? Because you're probably constantly writing.
I'm doing a lot, yeah, but I still eat. I do that occasionally. So,
Um, First of all, thanks for being here. This is our fourth Creative Currency interview. This short form 30-minute speaker series is fun, and we're ramping up by catching up with old friends and peers in the business and people in different parts of the business. And you have a unique circumstance and history, including starting in the, was it the publicity department or the press?
I was a
Or
publicist for Universal
yeah,
Pictures. Yeah,
yeah, which is unbelievable. But I
yeah.
also want to thank you for, in the history and legacy of Writers Boot Camp, you have a very important position and role because you were the first mentor that I trained to take over a lot, what eventually became basic training. Because when we extended, and you were in that first 20-week think tank, which is now pro membership, which the format is already 28 years old compared to
Amazing.
1992, not
I
to
know.
age either
Crazy.
of us, you know. And but I really appreciate because you have a canon of work and success on a level of productivity as an alumnus of Writers Boot Camp, and that certainly warrants a long form interview, which we can plan in the future. But this series is designed as a quicker conversation, and it's challenging to cover all of your accomplishments. But is there anything you do recall from that group of 12 or 14 writers in my living room in
Mhm.
92, that first think tank? I'm visualizing Mary Beekler.
No, she was. I don't think she was in the class.
Oh,
I don't
she
know.
might have been in the
I
next one.
can't I can't say. All I know is that I took Writers Boot Camp to begin with, the first class. Then I took it. I think I took it a second time, and then I took Think Tank, what was called Think Tank then. So I
Right.
wrote three scripts, three screenplays along the way. Prior to that, I had been writing television, and writing, getting some assignments in TV and so on. But I really wanted to. My goal was to write movies, and I thought that writing television back then might be a way into writing movies, and it really wasn't. But it did teach me the script form, even though screenwriting is different, screenplays are different. It still gave me the familiarity of the script form and that kind of writing and dialogue and so on. So when I came into boot camp, I had that kind of experience, but I really felt like, for as many millions of movies as I had seen over the course of my life at that point, I still, getting behind the wheel basically is very different.
Yeah.
And so what was so great about the class is that it was so kind of boiled down to such, kind of understandable basics. It was so unintimidating and so, just so helpful that it really, not only I learn how to write a screenplay, but I learned how to tell a story, which is maybe even more important, a story from start to finish. And I've used it. I've used the boot camp to this day. I'm writing my fifth novel right now. I am still using the boot camp structure. That same. I still break it down into 12 sequences, and even for a
Right. The
book, and
363.
yeah, 360. And even if it's not written down, it's in here. And it's over the course
Right.
of time, it's become so, ingrained in me that it kind of goes beyond even outlining or anything like that. I just kind of know kind of internally where these steps need to go and what I need to have there. So it was, incredibly valuable. And definitely, I met great people along the way, through the system, and then, was fortunate enough to be able to teach for, I don't know, 7 years, something like that. I
Yeah,
think
I
I taught
mean, it was
90
an it was an
99.
it was a credit and a tribute to you and your ethos. Not only the times we shared in the early days of Writers Boot Camp, but your aplomb and intelligence and sense of humor, and also, pragmatic approach, but your warmth toward people, which was what I was able to, that allowed me to delegate because I had taught 40 sessions in the first 3 years. I
Right.
started a new group every 3 weeks. We still do 9 basic trainings a year, every 4 to 6 weeks, one, and they overlap on different days. But, then it grew to the point where I remember having 15 people in the living room, and then I was like, we've got to get out of my living
We got to
room.
get out of this place.
And we had that office on Sepulveda that
Right.
was sort of a converted motel style
Right.
place
Right.
on stilts with the one classroom, and that was great. I remember two projects, This Magic Moment, and I see the poster behind you.
Right. Yes, it was eventually made into a movie.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, it
And
took
then,
20. I could tell you a very quick funny story about that. Now, I wrote this magic moment. It was the second. I wrote it in the second boot camp that I took. So I wrote it in 1990. Let's see, what's this? Um, I
could have
wrote.
been
I
90,
Right,
could have been
wrote it in like
91.
91. Okay, so it was a screenplay, and it sort of I took boot camp and was in think tank and then taught during that period where there was just such a rush of spec screenplays, options, sales, movies were being made left and right. The theatrical business was completely different than it is now. So this magic moment was probably the first script I wrote that actually got like buyers' attention, and I met tons of people from it. And it was basically a story about a young man who ends up falling for this older actress when she comes to this small town to film a movie. And the movie got very close to being made many times as a theatrical feature. Well, 20 years later, in 2012, it was made as a TV movie for Hallmark. And we readjusted the ages. Instead of him being 19 and the woman being 33, they were both around 30. The man and the woman were both around 30. But the basic story stayed very much the same, and much of what was in that original script stayed very much the same. And remember driving, they shot it out in the LA area in a place called Piru, which is sort of all the way out. And I remember driving to the set that day and thinking to myself, this is like the end of a dream, basically. Like I've been sitting with this
Right.
script for 20 years, and here it is being made. And ultimately, it was made really well. It's one of my favorite things that I've ever had produced. So, the point is,
Yeah.
nobody should ever give up hope that something can get
Right,
made. But
because also what we used to say is the scripts, the drafts, especially if they were too early, but you keep improving your writing samples and your
yeah,
drafts as people read them,
yeah,
hopefully not relying on the notes from outside parties and,
yeah,
because they just want to get in business. But the good people, they would give notes and make suggestions, and then that continuity of notes, meaning a consensus, would usually give a writer a leg up on changes to make.
yeah.
But those could be in a drawer, and like annuities,
Hmm.
when trends shifted, as long as you had an existing script versus just an idea, you
Right.
could benefit from that. I
Right.
also remember, because I found recently the article, the little blurb in Variety on your script, the spec you set up, Manhattan Transfer,
Right. Right. Right.
which was a
Yeah.
great idea. Tell me
Yeah.
if I'm doing it justice.
Okay.
A New York therapist starts taking on the traits or problems of his patients.
Yeah, it was at the time it was a New York radio shrink, and so like the Howard Stern of radio shrinks ends up being cursed by the ghost of Sigmund Freud, and ends up taking on all of the neuroses of all of his callers, who he's always berating for being neurotic, and that's how he gets out of the whole thing. It was a big New York movie at a time where it would have been a great Jim Carrey film or something like that. And it was picked up by Fox, and what was then 20th Century Fox, and Davis Entertainment, and we went through a lot of development with it, and ultimately it didn't get made, but it's still a great idea. And I guess
Yeah.
now Dennis Fixman, this therapist, would have a podcast maybe or something. I don't know. You
Dennis
know,
Fixman.
very successful podcast. But yeah, it was that moment was such a great culmination of all the work that I had done up until that point. I had been written many screenplays throughout the 90s. As a jump off from Writers Boot Camp and all the teaching, and to actually see an actual purchase and an actual thing come, it was so
Yeah,
real.
one of the things that I appreciated, and I don't emphasize mini script or short scene conflict writing as much week 3 as I used to, but we were so on it back then. We were so focused on development, even though I later realized that we needed to impart more rewriting skills, and that's how I created the full development method, and you know, 10 drafts over 6 months, and each these 6 stages of achievement every 40 hours of work, just to get something not finished but ready for friends in the business, and taking through that full development process. But I loved how you used to describe like the bombing through the short
Yeah.
scene conflict
That's
writing.
exactly the word I used.
Yeah,
And I would say,
exactly.
write your script. Do not use the backspace key on the computer. Just
That's
keep bombing
awesome.
ahead, bombing ahead,
Yes.
bombing through. And you know what? It's a hard thing to do, and I can't really do it much these days because I don't want to say I know too much, but it's like, it's like I know I'm going to get there, so I might as well make it good
Right.
as I go. But I will say the best lesson from all of that was really just the whole idea of not perseverating over every single word. And as time has gone on, and I've had many, many TV movies produced and theatrical features and so much else, and I've seen how the process worked in terms of like, you would sit by yourself and like perseverate for a day on a paragraph or on a section of dialogue,
Right.
and then it would go into development or go into production, it was production, and it was gone. And it's like, why did I spend all that time on it? Because it's gone. And the expression "kill your darlings," I mean,
Yeah.
it's so valuable because you can't hold on to anything that tightly. And I've also, in the book world, I've learned so much about that because it's so different. Because in the book world, your editors give you notes, but it's much more of a collaborative effort, and it's much in that you don't have to make the changes if you don't really want. Like it's very different. As opposed
I
to in the
find
film.
the potential, the editors used to be in-house at publishing companies. Now they're consultants.
Yeah,
We can get to that if we have
yeah,
time, and we'll go a little longer than
yeah.
30 minutes today, maybe 40, 45, because I do want to talk to you in a little bit about the distinctions of prose, the choices you make in your writing. Because even when I saw your first play, was it at that theater on Fairfax?
Uh, well, my first play was at the Stella Adler
Oh
Theater on
yeah,
Hollywood
yeah,
Boulevard. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
But I have done things at that theater on
So
Fairfax.
can you just describe your segue, and it wasn't a constant segue, your interlude, and then later interludes from TV and feature film writing to writing for the stage, because I've always enjoyed in your live productions your crisp, and all your work, your crisp style, your ability without being overly, focused on puns, but your humor. And we have used the word pivot over the past 5 years, and in this Creative Currency series, from about how traditional industry peers have had to pivot, but it wasn't quite a pivot for you at the time. It just was an opportunity.
Yeah, yeah.
So what was that decision making?
Yeah, all the different things I've done, they've really been what I call an expansion. Because pivot's a good word and it's used a lot now, but pivot kind of feels like really changing everything. Like if I'm writing books, but I'm still writing screenplays. I'm doing all of it. The different formats really feed upon themselves, and all of that. But I found when I wanted to write my first play, I had an idea for a story and something that I wanted to tell. And I also knew there was probably not a movie in it, per se. And literally that experience, it was kind of in the mid 90s, 95 maybe, May of 95. It was a Memorial Day weekend, and I just had the whole weekend to myself. And I just started writing what was the story. And I really wrote it very, very fast and wrote what was a play. And I had never written a play before, but I'd seen them, obviously. And I don't know, I just wrote this. And it worked, and I didn't know what I would do with it, but I had it, and then through circumstances I ended up getting it produced. But it was such a great experience, and the difference is, of course, screenplays are so much about showing and not telling, and plays are so much about telling and showing less because you just it's
Right,
more
because you
format.
don't have the artifice, and and mostly it's people talking,
Yeah,
which goes back to half-hour sitcom,
right, right.
multicam.
Yeah.
So you had that in your bag. How do you
Yeah.
reflect on your plays as a genre or a format? And congratulations, I noted that your most recent play, April, May, June, about
Mm.
three sisters,
Yeah.
won an award, won and was nominated for a number of awards.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
How do you, because while you may remember that when Brandon Tartikoff, the head of NBC at maybe 29 years old, used the word dramedy, it made sense.
Yeah.
I don't love the word dramedy because while it can still be used to make a point, in TV, half hour comedy, half hour is comedy, it can still be intense, an hour long can have comedic relief.
Yeah.
I think in a play, it's less specious to me. It's less of a vague or ambivalent phrase
Yeah.
than it is when newer writers use it. I don't think it has the meaning that it used to.
Yeah.
So, how do you reflect on your plays as a genre or a format?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I think, almost all of the plays that I've written, except for one, have been comedies. One I wrote that hasn't been produced, but it's next on my list to get done somehow. Is very it's a fiction based on fact story. It's a Hollywood story, and it's very serious. But and even then, there's a little bit of humor in it. But the other script plays have really been comedies. If I had to boil it down, they're comedies. However, the trick with comedy is, and I don't mean like very, very broad comedy. I don't even mean like, things like The Studio or the TV show, things that are really funny, and really just, they're great comedy. How do you deal, especially when you're dealing with stories about, real people, basically, how do you get some gravitas into the comedy? And how do you use comedy to work your way into saying something serious that people will hear? So I think we always will hear things a little more, things that are heavy or things that are more serious, better when they kind of slide in through comedy. And that's what I have found, not even purposely. This is kind of the way my style turned out to be, where they start off, they're funny, and there's banter, and there's what I hope are clever characterizations or things that are entertaining, but that they really have a lot behind them, and there's a lot more going on there, because like in a play, as the play goes on, things tend to get more serious. That's when all the digging is done. But if you can do it in a comedic environment, I think people pay more attention to it. So for me, I still call them comedies, but the word dramedy actually has worked out better in a couple of my books. I've called them dramedies. And I think there's value to the word. I know it feels like neither here nor there, and it's really a drama, but you want people to think it's funny. But I think there's some real value these days to the word dramedy, because comedy and drama have it's kind of sort of gray in terms of what's out there.
How did you decide to write your first novel?
Ah. Well,
The Last Birthday Party.
The Last Birthday Party, yeah. I had always wanted to write a novel, and I really hadn't had the time, and I was always writing, a script. I also am a journalist too, so I have I've written for the LA Times for many, many years as a contributing writer on a fairly regular basis. So during that particular period, this was in very early 2020, right before the pandemic. I said, I've got a little time, I've got a window, I've got an idea. I had a character. I didn't have an idea for a story, but I had a character. And I said, let me just try this. Let me see. I love books. I've read them, since I've read a lot since I'm a kid and all that. And the whole idea of writing a novel seemed so daunting. It's long, it's a lot of words. It's different. It's a different kind of storytelling in a way than movies and television, in some ways. And I just said, let me just do it. And excuse me, a friend of mine who was also a screenwriter and a director, she said to me, like a few months before this, she says, you know what I'm doing? I'm writing a novel. Can you believe it? I said, how come? She goes, I don't know. I wanted to do it, and it's working out. I don't know what I have, but I'm really enjoying it. Well, anyway, she's gone on to become a very, very successful novelist.
Nice. Yeah.
And she was very inspiring to me, and I was like, go for it. Well, I was like, well, I've been telling her to go for it. Maybe I should try it. And I just did. I started writing, and what I did was I was doing a lot of other things at the time, and I said, I'm going to write a page a day. If I don't get any more than a page a day, by the end of the year, I'll have this book done. Well, enter the pandemic in March of 2020, a couple of months after I started, and I really had a lot more time. So I was able to use that time to write the book. But even there was some days where it really was only a page or two a day, but I never missed a day. And in the end, the book was done by July of that year. And of course, it went through lots of changes and, development and so on, until I found a publisher. And then after that, we did editing, a lot of editing of it. But it was a great process and I learned a lot. But I found that, like I said earlier, being able to have what is the basic boot camp movie structure in my head as I was writing it, it really made it move along a lot faster. So I have what could be in a movie the end of Act One. I have the midpoint with the acceleration. I have the low point 3/4 of the way into the story. I have the battle at the end where the characters resolve their issues. It's very similar. And I don't necessarily think the book reads like a movie, but I did adapt it into a
Right.
screenplay, which was also a fascinating experience.
Yeah, a couple of distinctions here. First of all, 12,000 alumni with probably 1,000 success stories, hundreds of books published by Writers Bootcamp alums, because once you work in the compact, not only structure, but level of expression, mode of expression in movies and TV, all of your prose becomes more crisp, intentional, and structured. And I tend, even in the 10-week basic training, will support television writers, pilot writers, but there's a trend toward multiple storyline. And for new writers, we don't emphasize ensemble stories. They tend to be writer-directors, from Dazed and Confused to Pulp Fiction to Crash, The Big Chill, Diner, those kinds of things. And so features and books are more structurally similar until you have variations of genre and personal point of view and creative voice and those kinds of distinctions. So, you're preaching to the choir, obviously, but I wonder still, because you make it so matter of fact. I had a little time on my hands, so I decided to write a
Had
book.
to undersell.
How do you sustain your regimen and your motivation on all this work?
Yeah, it's funny because people will say to me, and listen, I'm no better than anybody else in most of this stuff. I've been doing it a long time, and I've just kept my energy level pretty much the same from day one. And I've had it, fortunately, I'm grateful. I've had enough successes along the way to keep the batteries, charged, and all of that. And I still have a lot of opportunities out there and contacts and things that come my way, things that I can go after. It still feels very vital, and perhaps even more now, given the breadth of experience that I have and the things that I've done. I mean, having these novels, I created my own IP. Now, the there's IP and IP, and this is not like, oh,
Right.
these books sold 3 million copies, so of course they're going to get picked up. But it's almost like somebody took a flyer on you already. Your publisher liked your work and published it, so maybe it's okay for us to do it too, or to look at it. So I found like all these new roads in there. But to answer your question, I just think it's like I enjoy the work. I'm always learning. I'm always learning something new. You think you've been doing this for a long time, and you're not going to learn something new. I'm always learning something new. I enjoy that. I'm open to it. I try to, keep moving with what's out there, and you try to find, I pitch a lot. I pitch a lot of, particularly a lot of TV movies, and a lot of these TV movies are, they're looking for how can we take sort of a new trend or a new something and turn it into kind of a traditional romantic comedy, let's say. So it's really fun to see how people are meeting each other these days in terms of dating and finding
Right.
stories within that. So, you just kind of keep going,
Is the TV movie business and the Christmas movie business as robust as it was?
I think I think relatively speaking, it is. I mean, certain budgets change. It's hard to say because I think it goes in waves a little bit. But I know places like Hallmark and Lifetime and now the streamers and are doing a lot of these made-for movies, and Hallmark always has done a lot of them for many years, as has Lifetime and all that. Sometimes the budgets are bigger than others, and the breadth of them are bigger than others. But there's a lot of work out there, for guild and non-guild writers. in these movies. But they take a lot of pitching, they take a lot of work to kind of move these things forward, and the advantage is that the numbers are on your side. So yeah, I
Right.
think it's a good area to be aware of.
Going back to the books, do you see and you have the current one is Please Come to Boston, but then
Yeah.
you have a new one, Canine Custody, so that's
Right,
the
coming out in
fourth.
September.
What
Yeah,
was the name of the second one?
it was called The Mother I Never Had.
Right. And then, I mean, obviously, that's right. You know, my perspective is slightly suspect of editors because I don't feel the ones that you pay as a consultant are necessarily helpful with ideation and structure, which fortunately you have that down. You
Right.
have those things down.
Hmm.
But can you mention a couple of breakthroughs or even just certain recurring guidelines that you have? One of the exercises I created years ago that's now this would be conversational, but it's now in the basic training workbook for 5, 6 years. A prose style sheet with 15 decisions you make, including POV and tense. And then also, I'm wondering, because I was actually listening to part of Please Come to Boston,
Oh,
and I wonder if you could guesstimate in your own book what percentage is reflective, the character having some reverie or subject or someone interjecting, some point of view interjecting about the past or about trepidation or anything like that, right? So do you go into a book with an approach like that?
well, the whole point of that book is reverie. It's a book that looks back, and it's not the book. The book is I'm very very close to that book of all the things that I've done because it's not my story, but it takes place in a world that I was in at Boston University during this period of time, and
Got
uh,
it.
and it's kind of like if I had known then what I knew later about life and myself, and I was put into this position that my main character Nikki is put into in the book, would I have acted upon what he did, and would my life have moved in a different direction in a different time frame than it did? So it was a bit of a what if. However, he was a much much more trepidatious character than I ever was. So I had fun letting him do some of the things that I didn't or would have been fearful of, or whatever.
Right.
But the fun thing with that book, because it's set in college back then, and then it flashes back. Most of it's set in the past, but some of it is set in the present, where the two main characters reunite after 50 years in present day Boston. So for me, the whole idea of the movie was looking back, and looking back. We look back at things in a little different way than they actually happen. So I tried to make the memories, which is kind of the present part of the book, essentially, and not the future, but the present. I try to make them feel like very real, like because when you separate yourself in any kind of writing, when you can use yourself, let's say, or some of your experiences as inspiration, but not duplication of a character, it really is very helpful because so many of my friends that I went to college with, they read the book and they go, okay, who was I? Who was I in the story? And all that. Because I maintained so many friendships from that period of time, and that particular floor of the dorm that I was on, where the whole thing takes place. And it was like, you're not. These are just amalgams. We are
Or
amalgams of things.
composites.
Yeah, composites of things. So, but I think the whole idea of writing something, let me just say, when I started writing it, I didn't know that I was going to do it in flashback. I thought it was going to be a linear story. And then I realized that there's so much more heft to this story if I bring the two main characters back together. And I wanted to see how, over the course of the years, two people who were one way in college, what they became X number of years later and why. And I think that's kind of a fascinating thing. So
Yeah,
it just
it's
worked
great.
out. Yeah.
It's great. If people want to find you and your books, GaryGoldsteinLA.com.
Right. That's
What's
my
the best
website.
what's the best place to get your books?
Just, that you can order them through any bookstore, but some bookstores still carry them. And then, just on Amazon, barnesandnoble.com, bookshop.org, any of the online places, they're all there. My new book's coming out September 22nd. It's very much a comedy called Canine Custody, about dogs and divorce. And
Nice.
it's fun. Yeah, it's really fun. And and then I am writing something new set during the 1980s in Laurel Canyon, which is where I live, about the music world. So I'm kind of excited
Oh,
about
that's
that.
well, that's great because it extends from prior works and docs about the '60s in Laurel
Yeah.
Canyon, right? And
Yeah, well,
maybe
it's
ventures
interesting.
into
Well,
the '70s.
it's set in 1984, and what's so interesting is that in terms of how people communicated back then and how people discovered things back then or researched things back then, it's a whole lot different than it is now.
Right.
So you're right, you were on your own back then,
Interesting.
which factors into the kind of mystery that the story is.
Just a quick note, if uh, our alumni and anybody paying attention can subscribe to our Writers Bootcamp YouTube, you can find me on LinkedIn, Jeffrey Gordon, and also our Instagram is writers_boot_camp. To maybe wrap up a few things, but at the risk of extending into new material, any suggestions and insight for new writers and artists? I've got a communique going out later today or tomorrow called AI for Writers. It says our unique tools are the prompts, but AI for writers is authentic intelligence. But is there any insight or any tools that you use that you would want to share, or any emerging trend? One of our past staff members and alum, Sean Reed, who you know of, is doing verticals, and that was this morning's conversation. But anything that you're recommending apart from some of the tools you learned at Writers Boot Camp, and anything
Well,
else that you utilize?
like I said earlier, as you know, the business has changed so much, and how scripts get distributed and how they get made, developed, purchased, not purchased. It's really different, and it was never easy. Listen, it was always an act of God if anything ever happened.
Right.
Not a religious person, but that's how I see it. But now it's tough. The access is different, and even though we have the internet and we have a lot of really good script writing organizations and places that people can submit things to and contests and all that, it's hard. But I think the basic thing still holds true. Write, I mean, it's cliched, but write what you know, and write a story that I've been in so many pitch meetings over time, and the question that invariably comes up, not necessarily as directly as I'm going to say it, but always comes up, is why are you the only person who can be writing this story, or the only person who could be pitching this story, or the best person to be pitching this story? And I think anytime you can say, well, you can have a part of yourself or a part of your real life experience, or the part of a real life experience of somebody you know or are very close to, and you've turned it into some kind of interesting fiction. I think that's always very, very powerful. And so I feel like any success I've had has really been by I don't want to say staying within my lane, because I really haven't per se, but doing being aware of what I know how to do best, or what I think
Right.
I do best, or what I think I gravitate toward most naturally, as opposed to saying, well, I'm going to write a horror movie because that sells, and we had a big weekend at the
Right.
box office. You can't do that. Now, if you happen to be a great sci-fi writer or a great horror writer or whatever, great, go for it, and that's what you want to do. But I would say really listen to who you are and what you bring to the writing, because good, authentic writing will find its place. I mean, it could take, like this magic moment, it could take 20 years, but it will find its place. And then definitely go out and write other things while you're waiting for your movie to be made.
Yeah, the
But
profound perspective of that, Gary, though, is as a professional, it's not that you have to have experienced it, but your point of view, your approach to it, and your ability to execute, because you write in a certain manner with the proper nuance or understanding of the experience of it. It's different than write what you know. You have to have experienced it because, an example that came up recently is somebody's writing about assisted living. Well, just because their family went through it or they, visited doesn't necessarily make them the best writer for it.
Mhm.
So the mark of a professional is the ability to become expert and to express that expertise. It's not necessarily that writing what you know is having experienced
Right.
everything,
Yeah.
right?
The knowing part is kind of is very broad, but it's like you end up writing, there was a long time ago I read something where they said you're always your main character. Even if you're writing, a serial killer movie, you are your main character. And what that I think means is you bring your own perspective to everything and your own kind of values and point of views to certain things. And then you instill them in a character and then in a main character to go on that journey with them. And then you try to make that person their own individual. So they're not always,
You.
they're not always me. Yeah.
Right, because one of the dialogue tests is that what the character would say based on who they are? Is that what you need them to say, or is that your
What I would say.
voice?
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Well,
D-
very,
Um,
very, but just real briefly, when my play April, May, and June was on a while back, that was about three adult sisters, and that was the whole cast, the three women. And when it was over, somebody said to me, they came out and they go, Gary, how do you write women so well? And it's like, it was an odd question because like we're writers and I'm not a woman, but I have had some of the experiences these sisters have gone through. But with my own family, you just take your, you bring yourself to it but still keep, like I said, still keeping the other characters alive. And it was a really interesting moment for me because it was like I've written a lot of women, and you don't have to be a woman to write a woman. You have to be a man to write a man, but you have to find ways of writing characters that people can relate to, and find
Right.
things that are relatable to everybody.
The
Whoever.
the dispositional context.
Yeah.
Um, so are you represented right now formally?
I have a manager. I have a
Okay.
manager, but I've gone through lots of agents and managers over time. I've had a lot of really good, supportive people. It's just kind of about what they can get done, and frankly, I can get a lot done myself. Because of kind of what I've learned
Prior
and the people that I know
relationships and
and all of that. The hard part for me is the places that I can't get to, and that's where a manager or somebody else is really
right.
helpful in terms of like, oh, well, we'll submit this for you to this particular production company where you can't get to, or that kind of thing. So yeah, yeah.
So for canine custody, what are your expectations and how did that work? And did any discussions with publishers or executives shift your approach to that idea?
Well, not really. The idea, I wrote the book. Basically, I've written all my books on spec. Essentially, and then been able to get publishers interested in them. But with Canine Custody, it started off as a TV movie idea. I've always thought it was a fun idea. Battling couple, decide to split, and it's all about the dog. I just
The
always thought that
custody,
would be
right?
very fun. And it never went anywhere as a film. So I figured, well, let me write it as a book. And I thought it would be it would have a lot of opportunity for great characters. And what I did was I ended up writing it for the first time ever in first person, and from 3 points of view, from the husband's point of view, the wife's point of view, and the dog's point of view. And so it's very funny, but it's also very, again, there's a lot of, I hope, serious, very meaningful stuff that goes on about relationships in this book and what people take away for it. But it's kind of cloaked in this kind of comedy. It's a little War of the Roses. It's got a little bit of that. It's kind of there's a lot of
Is there
anger.
any specific decision you made about the dog's voice or vocabulary or style?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. Well, I didn't want him to be at all cartoonish or juvenile or anything. I set the whole thing up in the very beginning where I have the dog say he has an opening. His chapters are her chapters are very short, by the way, because I didn't want it to get gimmicky. So her chapter
Right.
is like page and a half, 2 pages,
See,
and
but also that's an intelligent approach.
yeah, Yeah, and the humans have much longer chapters, but the dog is sort of observing all this stuff and having her own reactions to emotional reactions to what's going on. But I think
As my neighbor's dog barks in the background right
okay, yeah,
now.
my dog is quiet, fortunately. But I think with had how I wanted the dog to be was I in the very I wanted her to be smart, but learning things along the way. So like so that I set up the fact that after she says introduces herself and explains what's going on at the end of her first chapter, which opens the book, she says, "If you're wondering how a dog knows so many words, you haven't been paying attention." And so it kind of like gives me some free reign to kind of
Right.
say like, I hear things, I don't hear things, I understand things, I don't understand things, I know words, I don't know words, and so it just whatever she does, and occasionally I'll have her say, "I'll bet you didn't know a dog knew that word," or
So
like,
it creates it
we
creates
curse too, yeah,
it creates an acceptable range
yeah,
and allows for that suspension of disbelief
yeah,
or the
it creates
extension of
rules.
belief.
Yeah, yeah. It's like, when you're doing a high concept, comedy or something, and where somebody's switching personalities or switching bodies, and you create the rule. You have to create some rules so that
Right, exactly.
what you're up for.
And do you collaborate much with your manager on the potential ancillary opportunities for your prior books?
Well, that really kind of goes into a whole other territory. It really is more like, a lot of the agencies have, agent agencies have movie, book to film agents. So there aren't a ton of them, but there are quite a few of them,
Hmm.
and they're responsible for picking up books and getting them turned into TV series, or basically now streaming series, and sometimes made feature films, but made for streaming movies. And that's a whole other world, and that's kind of where where I've been, and trying to get those people interested
For
because it's
example,
fun.
do you have a Bible for, obviously you have a toolkit like a 363 for a book, but do you also have some of the other tools and exercises that go into a Bible, like the project plan, which is checkpoint one in pro membership, eventually grew into a 10 answer concept bullet essay that you slap on the front, and the Project Unity pages and some of the other bullet essays that maybe comment on topicality or the distinctions of subject matter or style of sensibility or comedy and things like that. So I recommend creating Bibles for each of the books.
Yeah. Well, there are a couple of things with that. One is that it's hard to get people to actually read a book. You know, the people, you submit things and they pass, so they call you in, but you don't really know like how much they've actually read, because you think about it, reading a book is a giant undertaking and people are busy and all that. And ultimately, it comes down to the story. It comes down to the
Right.
concept in so many ways, as it does with movies. Can I sell this? Hopefully, the book is good, but is this a marketable idea that I know who I could sell it to? And very often, like even when you try to get a book agent to get you to a publisher, that not the book to film agent, but just a book agent, they'll pass on something, and they always say it's not because it's not good. Somebody else may think it's right. It's like in my world, I don't know how to sell this, but somebody
Right.
else may. So it really so much comes down to the concept, and like everything, it's very random. It's just I always say the roulette wheel is spinning all the time, and your ball may drop into it. I don't know, but
Well,
it can be very
I
random.
do feel there's potential for canine custody, but
I do.
your work is so excellent. Your level of productivity puts most people to shame.
Oh, thank you.
Your stick-to-itiveness, your success, it's just we're so appreciative of, and it's just always so good to talk to you, Gary.
Yeah, same here,
So
Jeff.
thanks for all your support,
Yeah,
and
my pleasure.
well, thanks for offering this insight today and for being a part of Creative Currency.
Yes, and thanks to you and Writers Boot Camp for getting me to understand how to write a movie and how to tell a story, because it's no small feat.
Yeah, thanks. So we'll talk soon.
Okay.
Appreciate
Take
it,
care.
everybody. I'm just going to wrap up with an
Okay.
announcement or two. Feel free to
Okay.
sign off.
Yeah, we'll sign
Thanks,
off. Bye,
Gary.
everyone. Thanks for listening.
So not bad for 48 minutes. We covered a lot of ground. This was Creative Currency number 4. We'll have 2 or 3 next week as well. The goal is to have 2 or 3 30-minute events each week. Maybe one of the summer weeks will be a little quieter than others. But thank you. Feel free to subscribe. You can always email me with a quick question, jg@writersbootcamp.com. Thanks again to Brad Miller, our Director of Development, who helps with a lot of the tech. And we'll see you soon. Have a good one. Thanks.